It is time for Tennessee beating Georgia. Wouldn't be the craziest upset. Where does Caleb go here? I'm interested. Tease me before I tell you who brings you what the H today, Caleb.
And Dave is the only hooker who likes to be teased.
Yes. Most just like to run that credit card and get the heck out of Dodge. I don't know. They take credit cards now or Venmo? I don't know how that works. Is it just a cash exchange thing?
I'm sure they do in Vegas where it's legal, but I doubt they do anywhere else.
True.
So
sorry. I'm not as up to date with my flesh purchasing methods. That's my bad. But I've been told by John Mulaney, who in his latest stand-up says, wait, you guys use Venmo for non-drug transactions? So maybe that could be used for prostitution as well. I don't know. All right, so give me a tease of two of Tennessee's biggest wins against Georgia in recent history before I tell you who brings you what the H.
So this is actually part of the peak era of when you were covering Tennessee, Dave. But Tennessee had a period under Fulmer. I think it was like 4 games in a row when they were double-digit underdogs on the road and won all of them. It was like Florida, Miami, and then Georgia, and I think LSU in the 2005 comeback right after Hurricane Katrina and Rita. That Georgia game, was a bigger upset than this would be. Tennessee was 12-point underdogs. And by the way, let me give you guys some parallels on that. The week before, Georgia had blown out LSU 45-16, similar to how Georgia just blew out Ole Miss. Tennessee had suffered a blowout loss at home to Auburn. This was supposed to be Georgia's best team under David Green. They were considered national title contenders easily. Tennessee, with Eric Ainge as a freshman, earlier that week, by the way, Kevin Burnett guarantees a win at Georgia. Remember that? And
wasn't it earlier that season?
No, it was after the Auburn loss. He said, we'll see Auburn again in the SEC championship game with Georgia coming up next week.
Okay. Right. Yeah. I do remember that. And I remember, to be honest with you, we snickered when he left the press conference. To be honest with you, I was like, there's no chance. All right. So continue with this. A neat history lesson. It's brought to you by Don Self of State Farm. Customer service still matters. Everybody looking for the best price. But what happens when something goes wrong? Well, that doesn't happen with State Farm agent Don Self. His team, they take their customer service very seriously. For well over 40 years, they have built their business and reputation on taking care of their customers. That's in Collegedale and Ottawa, as well as the greater Chattanooga area. Don and his team pride themselves on making sure you and your family won't have any surprises at the time of a claim. Customer service still matters. Don Self, your friendly neighborhood State Farm agent for the greater Chattanooga area. All right. So bigger upset 2004, 1992, or 2023. Which would they be between the three?
Well, 2004 would be the biggest. But I wanted to get into 1992 also because we didn't mention
just via point spread, though.
Just via point spread, but also via rankings. I think Tennessee was like number 17 and Georgia was number 3 in 2004.
Okay, but I covered that game. I'm going to go ahead and tell you this would be a bigger upset.
It's a bigger upset talent-wise because I think Tennessee was close to Georgia on talent in 2004.
Agreed.
But I don't – so I'll give you that. But then there's 1992. Heath Schuler, new quarterback. You're at Georgia. Georgia's a higher-ranked team. And Tennessee's dealing with an interim head coach at the time in Philip Fulmer because Johnny Majors is having open-heart surgery. Nobody thought they would win that one. And for the record, the upsets don't just go one way. You know what also was a huge upset and may have been the biggest upset of the whole series? The 2001 game where Tennessee lost to Georgia with the hobnail boot game. That, I mean, you want to talk about the talent gap that year was larger than it is this year for Tennessee.
Yeah, and don't bite on the play fake, Dominique Stevenson. There's no reason to run the football there. They were going to run play action. They
had 12 seconds left. Yeah, they had no timeouts.
I don't even think they had 12. But if you run the football and you get caught, I do remember it was the amount where you're not going to have another play. I thought it was like 6, but either way,
that
you're
was
not
also
going to have another play.
Mark Richt knew that John Chavis would not be able to account for the fullback. Not to knock John Chavis.
I think I hate to throw players under the bus, but I thought that was Stevenson's issue. I mean, he bites on the play fake, and I mean, if you had maybe he hadn't been coached up to do that, but at that point in the game, you got to have some awareness. That to me was the equivalent to jumping out of bounds at Ole Miss for Joe Milton.
You're probably right.
You have got to have some game awareness to know that I'm not biting on play action, the hobnail boot game. And they still play that all the time. And I want to give a shout out to Bob Kessling and John Ward for a second. I think it's pretty damn obvious that you know who Bob and John wanted to win. You know that. But man, I was listening to the Georgia Radio Network, and I hope this doesn't get around to them, but I'm paid to give my opinion. That whole we're on the 40, we're on our 40, we're on our 25, we're on their 25. Does anybody really want to hear that sort of play-by-play? Or is that just me being a purist? I understand that John Ward got a little bit higher and a little more excited, but I was out and about and heard the Ole Miss broadcast that's carried, and I love flipping around to old play-by-play guys, and really it's pointless now because there's no Larry Munson, there's no John Wards anymore, and I used to love that Saturday night coming home from a game. But don't you hate it when they say we're down to 32, and this guy's
like when they say we're, yeah.
Oh, we constantly. We're down to their 32. Like you're out there.
We just stepped on their faces with a hobnail boot is just like the most like unprofessional thing you could ever say in a broadcast, quite honestly.
But it's kind of doable when you're of that generation. When you're of our generation, no. Nada. Caleb, you can't do that. All right, so the 92 game was big. However, I'll say that, and the SC Scott guy says it's the home team's radio broadcast. I have no problem with it. I just think there's a difference between going over the top. Understand. The thing about the 92 game you have to remember, and we've talked about how quarterbacks can surprise, you had a guy named Heath Schuler, and that's about as surprising as you can get with his athletic ability. I think that's one of the primary reasons. You know what would have been bigger than the two you mentioned?
Which
ready for this? James Banks beating Georgia in Athens with your commitment, Chris Leak, sitting in the stands watching his brother, CJ Leak, get one series and benched. Kudos to Philip Fulmer. That was the right thing for the program. They're not in that game with CJ Leak playing the whole game, but they're in that game with this crazy sort of James Banks run around sort of offense. And it wasn't sustainable, but on that Saturday in Athens, it almost got Tennessee the win. I can't remember that. It was an odd score. I can't remember the score.
Well, Georgia jumped out to an 18-0 lead and it became 18-13. Was it worth it though? Because you lost the game anyway, and you lost the season going 8-5, and then you lost Chris Leak because you didn't play CJ in that game.
I didn't think so at the time, Caleb, but I do now because I think Chris Leak was a pedestrian quarterback.
You thought he was a pedestrian quarterback?
Yeah, I don't think he's great. I mean, based on his recruiting ranking at the time, I totally would have agreed with you. But
in his defense, he also his first 2 years he had to play for Ron Zook. And then he had to play for Urban Meyer, who was a great coach, but he was not cut out to run the spread offense. That was not what he does.